In 1836, a 21-year-old inventor named Samuel Colt patented a weapon that would change the course of American history: the revolver, a gun that could fire 6 shots without reloading. Before Colt, firearms were slow, unreliable, and required constant attention. A soldier could fire maybe 3 rounds per minute if he was fast, but Colt's invention changed everything. 6 shots, fast, reliable, deadly. Within a generation, the Colt revolver had won the American West, armed both sides of the Civil War, and built one of the most powerful manufacturing empires in the nation. But this is not a story about triumph. This is a story about how genius can destroy the very people who create it, how wealth can poison a family from within, and how an American icon became a curse that haunted 3 generations of Colts. Because while Samuel Colt built an empire, he also built a legacy of addiction, madness, and ruin. And when he died at the height of his power, he left behind a family that would spend the next 50 years tearing itself apart. If you're fascinated by the hidden tragedies behind America's greatest success stories, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We're diving deep into the stories that shaped this nation, one documentary at a time. Samuel Colt was born in 1814 in Hartford, Connecticut, into a world that would have seemed impossibly distant from the empire he would one day command. His father, Christopher Colt, was a textile manufacturer who struggled to keep his business afloat during America's early industrial years. The Colt family was not poor, but they were not secure either. They lived in that uncomfortable middle space where respectability required constant effort and failure was always just one bad season away. Samuel's mother, Sarah, died when he was only 7 years old. That loss would haunt him for the rest of his life. His father remarried quickly, desperate to hold the family together, but young Samuel never truly connected with his stepmother. He felt like an outsider in his own home. By the time Samuel was a teenager, it was clear he was different from his siblings. He was curious, inventive, and obsessed with mechanics. While other boys were learning their father's trade or preparing for respectable professions, Samuel was taking things apart to understand how they worked. He was also, by all accounts, a difficult young man. Impulsive, prone to wild ideas, quick to anger. His father sent him to boarding school, hoping structure would tame him, but Samuel was expelled for setting off explosives during a school demonstration. He had been trying to impress his classmates with a primitive underwater mine. Instead, he nearly blew up the school pond. That recklessness, that willingness to gamble everything on an idea, would define both his genius and his destruction. At 16, Samuel ran away to sea, working as a deckhand on a merchant ship bound for India. It was during those long months at sea that the idea came to him. Watching the ship's wheel turn and lock into place, he began to sketch designs for a rotating cylinder that could hold multiple rounds of ammunition, a gun that could fire again and again without reloading. When he returned to America at 18, Samuel Colt was no longer a wayward boy. He was a man with a vision, but turning that vision into reality would require money, connections, and a level of ruthlessness that even Samuel had not yet discovered in himself. If you're enjoying this story and want to see more American history documentaries like this, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which historical figure you'd like us to cover next. Samuel Colt's first attempt to fund his invention was a disaster. With no money and no reputation, he took to the road as a traveling showman, billing himself as Dr. Colt, a chemist who demonstrated the wonders of laughing gas to paying audiences. For 2 years, he traveled from town to town, putting on exhibitions where volunteers would inhale nitrous oxide and stumble around the stage while the audience roared with laughter. It was humiliating work for a man who believed he was destined for greatness, but it gave him something he desperately needed: cash. By 1835, he had saved enough money to hire gunsmiths to build working prototypes of his revolving cylinder design. He filed for patents in both America and Europe. On February 25, 1836, Samuel Colt received U.S. patent number 9430X. He was 21 years old. With patents in hand, Colt moved to Paterson, New Jersey, and founded the Patent Arms Manufacturing Company. He was certain that the U.S. military would immediately recognize the brilliance of his design and place massive orders. He was wrong. The early Colt revolvers were expensive, complicated, and prone to misfiring. Military officials were skeptical. Why would they invest in an unproven weapon when traditional muskets worked just fine? The few sales Colt did make were to civilians and Texas Rangers fighting on the frontier, but it was not nearly enough to keep the company afloat. By 1842, the Patent Arms Manufacturing Company was bankrupt. Samuel Colt's dream was dead, his investors had lost everything, and Samuel himself was left with nothing but debt and a reputation as a failed inventor who had squandered other people's money. For 5 years, Samuel Colt wandered in the wilderness of failure. He tried to sell other inventions. He worked odd jobs. He watched as other gunsmiths copied his designs without paying him a cent. But Samuel Colt was not a man who accepted defeat easily. He was angry, bitter, and desperate. And then, in 1846, everything changed. The United States went to war with Mexico, and suddenly, the military that had once dismissed Colt's revolvers as unnecessary was desperate for weapons that could fire rapidly in close combat. Captain Samuel Walker of the Texas Rangers reached out to Colt with a proposition. If Colt could design a more powerful, more reliable version of his revolver, Walker could secure an order from the U.S. Army. 1,000 guns. It was the opportunity Samuel had been waiting for. The problem was that Samuel Colt no longer had a factory. He no longer had tooling or machinery. He didn't even have the rights to manufacture his own design because the patents had lapsed when his company went bankrupt. But Samuel Colt was nothing if not resourceful. He partnered with Eli Whitney Jr., whose father had invented the cotton gin, and together they manufactured the new Colt Walker revolver in Whitney's factory in New Haven. The gun was a beast. It weighed 4.5 pounds, fired a .44 caliber round, and was the most powerful handgun in the world at that time. The U.S. Army loved it. Texas Rangers loved it, and suddenly, Samuel Colt was back in business. By 1847, Colt had repaid his debts and secured enough capital to build his own factory in Hartford, Connecticut. This time, he was not going to repeat the mistakes of his youth. He hired the best engineers, implemented cutting-edge manufacturing techniques, and standardized his production process so that every part of every gun was interchangeable. It was revolutionary. Before Colt, guns were handmade by artisans, each one slightly different. Colt turned gun-making into an assembly line. He could produce thousands of revolvers faster and cheaper than anyone else in the world. By the time the California Gold Rush began in 1849, every prospector heading west wanted a Colt revolver on his hip. The gun that won the West was not won by cowboys and sheriffs. It was won by Samuel Colt's factory in Hartford. But success brought new dangers. Samuel Colt was now wealthy, famous, and deeply paranoid. He had been betrayed before. He had watched competitors steal his ideas, and he was determined that no one would ever take what was his again. He became ruthless in protecting his patents, suing anyone who dared to manufacture a revolving firearm. He lobbied Congress to extend his patent protections. He paid off politicians, judges, and military officials to ensure that Colt remained the dominant name in American firearms. And it worked. By 1855, Colt's factory was producing 150 revolvers a day. He was one of the richest men in America, but wealth had not made Samuel Colt happy. It had made him suspicious, controlling, and isolated. In 1856, Samuel Colt married Elizabeth Hart Jarvis, the daughter of a prominent Connecticut minister. She was young, refined, and came from exactly the kind of respectable family that Samuel had always envied. For a man who had spent his youth as a wandering showman and failed inventor, marrying Elizabeth was proof that he had finally arrived. They had 4 children together, though only one, a son named Caldwell, would survive to adulthood. Samuel adored his family, but he was never truly present. He was consumed by his business, by his feuds with competitors, by his obsession with control. He worked 18-hour days. He traveled constantly, and he drank. Heavily. Samuel Colt's alcoholism was an open secret in Hartford. He would disappear into his office for days at a time, emerging only to bark orders at his engineers or dictate threatening letters to patent infringers. His temper, already volatile, became explosive when he drank. Employees feared him, business partners learned not to cross him, and Elizabeth, trapped in a marriage to a man who could not stop long enough to be a husband, grew increasingly isolated. But despite his personal demons, Samuel Colt's business continued to thrive. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, both the Union and the Confederacy wanted Colt revolvers. Samuel, ever the opportunist, sold to both sides. By the time he died in 1862 at the age of 47, Samuel Colt had built an empire worth millions, but he had also built a curse. Samuel Colt died of complications from gout, likely worsened by years of heavy drinking. He left behind a grieving widow, a young son, and a company that had become the largest private armory in the world. Elizabeth Colt, who had spent years in her husband's shadow, now found herself in control of an empire she barely understood. And Caldwell, only 6 years old when his father died, would grow up under the weight of a legacy he could never escape. Elizabeth Colt was not a businesswoman, but she was determined to preserve her husband's legacy. She took control of Colt's patent firearms manufacturing company, and, against all expectations, she thrived. Elizabeth hired talented managers, expanded the factory, and kept the Colt name at the center of American industry. She became one of the wealthiest women in America. She built schools, funded churches, and turned the Colt estate into one of the grandest mansions in New England. For a time, it seemed as though the Colt family had survived Samuel's death and emerged even stronger. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Caldwell Colt, the only surviving heir, was growing up in a world of immense wealth and suffocating expectation. Caldwell was a sensitive, intelligent boy, but he lacked his father's ruthlessness. He loved art, music, and literature. He had no interest in guns or manufacturing, and as he grew older, it became clear that Caldwell was not equipped to run the Colt empire. He struggled with anxiety and depression. He drank, just as his father had. And when Elizabeth died in 1895, leaving Caldwell as the sole heir to the Colt fortune, the weight of that inheritance crushed him. Caldwell tried to fulfill his mother's expectations. He took a seat on the board of Colt's manufacturing. He managed the family estates, but he was drowning. The fortune that should have been a blessing had become a prison. In 1904, Caldwell Colt died by suicide. He was 48 years old. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but everyone in Hartford knew the truth. Caldwell had taken his own life, unable to bear the burden of being a Colt. With Caldwell's death, the direct line of Samuel Colt's family ended. The company passed into the hands of distant relatives and corporate managers. The Colt estate was sold off piece by piece, and the legacy that Samuel Colt had built with such ferocity and ambition dissolved into bitterness, tragedy, and loss. The Colt Manufacturing Company continued to operate long after the Colt family had disappeared from its leadership. It survived 2 world wars, countless corporate mergers, and the collapse of the American firearms industry in the late 20th century. But the company that Samuel Colt had built was no longer a family business. It was just another name in the gun industry, bought and sold by investors who had no connection to the man who had started it all. The Colt revolver, once the symbol of American innovation and frontier independence, became a relic. By the 1980s and 1990s, Colt's manufacturing was struggling to compete with cheaper imports and modern firearms designs. The company filed for bankruptcy in 1992 and again in 2015. Today, Colt's manufacturing company still exists, but it is a shadow of what it once was. The factory in Hartford, where Samuel Colt once employed thousands of workers, is now a historic site. The Grand Mansion where Elizabeth Colt entertained presidents and industrialists is a museum. And the Colt family, the dynasty that Samuel Colt believed would last forever, is gone. The last direct descendants of Samuel Colt lived quiet, unremarkable lives far from the spotlight. Some changed their names, others simply disappeared into history. The fortune that Samuel had amassed, the empire he had built, the legacy he had fought so viciously to protect, all of it slipped away within 2 generations. The story of the Colt family is not a story about guns. It is a story about the cost of genius. Samuel Colt was a brilliant inventor, a ruthless businessman, and a man who could not escape his own demons. He built an empire, but he could not build a family. He created a legacy, but he could not create peace. And when he died, he left behind a son who inherited wealth but not purpose, power but not happiness. Caldwell Colt's life was shaped entirely by his father's success, and that success destroyed him. He was given everything except the one thing he needed most, which was the freedom to be his own man. There is a lesson in this, though it is not a comforting one. The things we build, the empires we create, the legacies we fight to protect, they do not belong to us. They belong to the people who come after us. And if we do not teach them how to carry that weight, if we do not give them the tools to find their own meaning, then we are not leaving them a gift. We are leaving them a curse. Samuel Colt gave his son a fortune and a name that demanded greatness, but he never gave him a father, and in the end, that was the one thing Caldwell needed most. The Colt revolver is still manufactured today. You can buy one in gun stores across America. It is still marketed as the gun that won the West, as a symbol of American independence and frontier spirit. But the family that created it is gone. The fortune that built Hartford, Connecticut, is gone. And the name Colt, which once meant power and innovation, now means something else entirely. It means the price of ambition. It means the weight of legacy. And it means that sometimes winning everything costs you the only things that truly matter. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who appreciates history, and Subscribe to the channel. We tell the stories that textbooks leave out, the human cost of America's greatest triumphs. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.